I'm Jean Watt, and I was fortunate enough to be born to a family in Pasadena, Miss Lorna and Herbert Hahn, and I was born in 1926. And when I was 2, we rented a house at the beach in Alamedas Bay. But when I was 5, we started coming to Newport. So every summer we rented a house on the South Bay front near the Beak family, on Balboa Island, starting in 1931. So I was 5, and I got to play all up and down anywhere in the bay, it seemed like, in the mud flats and whatnot. A lot of our time was spent with the Beak family. So my mother had the presence of mind and was sold by Joe Beak a lot on Harbor Island in 1937, and for $2,500 we could have a lot on Harbor Island if we would build a house within a year on it, because they wanted to get things moving there. There were 5 houses there before ours. And so we built that house, and then my mother said, in her wisdom again, I better buy the lot next door, which they did. And so we continued to come to the beach every summer and every weekend. Then I went off to college, and when I got married, we came down here. My husband was a physician. We came to Newport in 1953 to set up an office and became full-time residents here. And so in 1953, the hospital was 2 years old. It was a perfect place for a new physician to get started.
Was that Hoag Hospital?
Hoag Hospital. And then we lived in Beacon Bay for 8 years, and then we were given this lot that they had so fortuitously bought on Harbor Island, and moved here in '61. And I have been a full-time resident, and I observed Linda Isle was called Shark Island then. It was just a mud flat. And so we could swim over there and play on the island. And then when Linda Isle was built with the houses, Promontory Point came along, and my friends were concerned about the environment, the growth, the loss of open space, the airport.
About the 1960s?
The late 60s, when the movement was happening. And it was nationally, sort of the anti-pollution laws were coming along. We finally formed SPON, Stop Polluting Our Newport, because our first matter that we were concerned about was pollution in the bay and just debris, and it was a mess.
How bad was it at that time to actually require that?
Well, what happened was that there would be a rain. Whenever it rained, every orange and loose piece of bamboo came down in these big rafts in the bay and would float around from shore to shore and then land on the beaches. So we decided, and what happened was, and this is the same thing that is always true that I've found, is that citizens, people who live here, have to get excited about something. And in fact, the way it started was that one of my neighbors asked me why the Harbor Island Association wasn't doing something about the bay and the pollution and the debris. And I said, because that's not what homeowner associations normally do. And they aren't going to do it because that just is the way that things work. And the way I see it is we have to form our own group and become a nonprofit that focuses, advocates, works on. So we formed SPAWN, and we did what we called the Bay Beautiful Week. Every summer we had a week where we got people all over the city to clean up their own beaches, and eventually the Chamber of Commerce got into the picture, and they started a harbor cleanup in the fall. So it became, I call it institutionalized. We formed a harbor quality committee for the city, and so the best of all worlds that I've found is when citizens get started because there's an issue, they build a credible case for the city getting involved in it, doing something about it on a citywide basis. And so SPAWN has started the Bay Water Quality Group going, and then the same thing happened with the airport later on. We believed that the citizens all over the city should be concerned about airport growth, and eventually it became a citywide issue. So our city council makes that a big priority every year.
Were you one of the pioneers in bringing that issue to bear toward city council?
The SPAWN group was, because we intervened in a lawsuit in the 1980s. The airport was starting to expand their facility, and we intervened in a lawsuit that the city had against the county's master plan. And then after that, the airport working group was formed. So what it's turned out to be is, both with the Bay and with the airport, there has been a development of a public-private partnership, if you want to call it that, which is the citizens nonprofit groups working with the city on these things, which gives it a lot more political clout. So that's been my evolution here.
During the 80s and early 90s in Newport, you have what's known as Ford Aerospace up off 1 Ford Road. Can you recall the impact of that corporation on our town, but did it seem like it was involved in terms of noise and development, or what was that like?
Well, it didn't resonate with me as being anything to worry about. But now that you think about it, it might have been, in retrospect, everything changed after the war, when things started to be built and people started to want to move here. Then that brought jobs, and of course the good thing was, at that time, people who worked for Ford or the Irvine Company or whoever they worked for could afford to live here, I would think. And so that worked really well. So I would say that, I'm looking at the world right now, in our neighborhood world, as being, we've reached a point where bringing in a new industry like that with a lot of new people and jobs is not exactly as beneficial as you might think, because we're already having a trouble with our own population just assimilating what we've got and providing housing for them. At that time, I think it might have been, it certainly was a growth measure to bring that in, bring jobs and families, which then had to buy a house, so it stimulated the whole market. But I wasn't thinking in those terms at the time so much. I was thinking specifically about certain locations that I thought should be saved, certain
like Banning Road.
open spaces or whatever they were. but not so much about the impact of any one industry coming in, that sort of thing. But we were, I don't know the years involved so specifically with Ford, but we were focused very specifically on saving the upper Newport Bay and whatever edges of it that we could, that would buffer it and that sort of stuff.
Did you think that Ford was going to expand into it at all?
Pardon?
Or were you guys afraid that Ford was going to expand into it or into the upper Newport
No,
Bay?
I don't think so. No, but I mean, that didn't occur at the time. It might have been a thought, but it was 1970 when Park Newport was built, and nobody particularly fussed about it, because it was 1975 when the state bought the upper Newport Bay
Okay.
property from the Irvine Company, and it was after we achieved that we began to look at the edges of it to see what could be saved as a buffer around it.
To maintain it.
And the upshot of that was that we were able to save the one piece where the Muth Interpretive Center is.
I know exactly. What
There's
you're talking
80 acres there.
about.
And we also didn't let the University Drive Road be built across the Upper Bay. So there were issues during the 60s and early 70s. See, what happened here is that there was a plan on the Irvine Company's walls and others to have the Coast Freeway and then connecting freeways. There would have been Newport Boulevard would be a freeway that connected to the Coast Freeway. MacArthur Boulevard would have been a freeway connecting to the Coast Freeway. So we would have had.
Is that why their roads are so large and
Well,
have so many lanes at this point? I mean,
No, they're large just because they needed to accommodate the traffic, but they would have been freeways,
Okay.
which would have been a different matter altogether as far as growth is concerned, because you've got all the overpasses and it would change the amount of traffic.
The entire landscape, so to speak.
So when they eliminated the Pacific Coast Freeway, and so the Irvine Company's plans were based on, original plans were based on thinking that they would have that kind of a transportation system around their property. Well, the Pacific Coast Freeway was eliminated in 1969, and then we all tried to down zone, if you want to call it that, the amount of development that could go in Newport Center because of traffic. So it's been like that ever since. But the Bay, then we were always able to, we managed to save some of the landscape around the Bay.
And that was primarily due to spawn, or?
Well, Friends of Newport Bay was the one that started it all.
Okay.
It was Frank Robinson and Fran. And it's really too bad you don't have I'm sure somebody has a interview with them that you can find. The Upper Newport Bay,
Muth Center.
it's called the Newport Bay Conservancy now, but
yeah.
whatever records they have. I mean, the whole environmental movement got started here because of Frank and Fran Robinson, who just stumbled onto the fact that Upper Newport Bay was going to be developed, and they just felt like that was wrong.
And is that how you got involved?
And then I got involved because other people asked me to, yeah.
Why do you think they wanted to ask you to get involved? Was it
Because they asked me to, So it was a few of my friends, Dodie Beek, Nancy Skinner, Corky Whitford, were meeting one day in about 1972, trying to get a guy elected to the city council who was an environmentalist. And they were sitting around and they needed a chairman. And they knew that I had been a Girl Scout leader and they knew I could organize things. So they called me up and asked me if I would help, and that's how it all happens. You ask somebody to help, and a lot of times they do, and then they get kind of involved in it.
Then they get over their head.
And
then then it goes over their head. Then it starts growing.
That's just grew. Well, I mean, after I did that, I thought, this is just wrong. You can't come in every 2 years and try to get somebody elected. You need to have an ongoing, consistent message you're trying to elevate in your community and just build on it all the time. So that way, we already had, that was 72. Friends of Newport Bay had already been formed. And then but we felt like something citywide should be operating, and that was why we formed Spawn. But, and so my theory has always been getting citizens to, my husband used to say, well, all right, raise the flag and see who salutes. So, if you have an idea and it's a good one, people will help you. Yeah.
Gravitate towards the
Yeah.
issue. In terms of experience, what is one of your fondest memories in Newport that you can recall? Is it going to the beach with your family, or?
Yeah, my fondest memories are that we lived in Beacon Bay, which was a lovely neighborhood for raising kids. It's got the little estradas so they can just go out in there and play safely. My brother, so we had 4 little kids that were within about 5 years apart altogether. And then my brother had 6 kids, and they had a house on Lido. They lived in Pasadena, but they came down here on weekends, and we all got together, and we would get together over here on Arbor Island where my parents had the 2 lots, and we would all play on the beach and have our barbecues, and it was really a uniquely lucky situation because the kids were all more or less the same age and they're good friends to this day. So it was such a, there was enough space here. They could play, they could go boating, they could do all this stuff. They're not confined. And so that was my best memory of it all.
Now, to future Newportians like me, from your experiences growing up in Newport, what is your message to us on how to preserve our culture or heritage, or what kind of message would you like to pass on to future generations?
Well, what I would like to say should happen now, and we're trying to stimulate that, is a really broad effort to figure out what we think Newport represents, what it should represent, what does mean something that should remain,
Define us.
or be saved, or be honored, and how we can make that clear in a general plan, which we hope we will be updating soon. But we want more people involved in this examination of your mind. Do you want it to be more, does it need to be from the millennial standpoint or the younger generation? Does it need to be more exciting? Does it need to be bigger and denser and that sort of thing? Or do we have the essence of what this city is designed to be, and the infrastructure kind of accommodates that at the moment? Because what's happening is that we're either going to decide what we want the destiny of it to be, that is, we collectively that live here, or if we don't do something to make our wishes come to fruition, such as, for instance, saving something, which in the past we've come too late to try to save something. There was the China House, there was the Bartholomew House, there was the Frank Lloyd Wright House, there was a lot of things that even if you can save a piece of it, like the Buffalo Ranch or something. Anyway, if we don't collectively decide what we want and be able to articulate that politically and in a broad enough way, then we are simply at the mercy of the developers whose objective every day is to look and see what they can buy and what they can build on it. And there's nothing wrong with that, but they're not going to have the community's best interest at heart. Their main objective is going to be to make as much money off of it as they can. And so that's happened in a few places where for instance, we've lost some of the shipyards, even though the general plan says we're going to maintain marine uses, we've lost them. And we've lost them because the citizens didn't get together and figure out how something needs to be saved. And so that's what we need to do. And we need a way of having community dialogue. And that's why I've been working with SPAWN and Line in the Sand, trying to create that kind of
to bridge to bridge the gap between the younger and older generations,
Mm-hmm.
to contemplate and foresee what it is we really want our town's direction to be.
Yeah.
We're really at it sounds like a pivotal point right now where our town will either retain its kind of older charm, or it truly is starting to be geared to turning into the next metropolitan Santa Monica, LA kind of a deal, with the amount of public transport now being geared towards here,
Yeah.
larger vessels being in our harbor, and now high rises. It looks like the city center of Fashion Island, specifically around Newport, is trying to become a larger cosmopolitan area based on the development.
Yeah.
And for my generation, your question, it sounds like, proposed to us is that something we really want? And if that's something that we're fine with, then don't become involved. But if it's something that it does cause an issue with you and the direction of the town's current heading, then get involved. Become involved, inform yourself of the issues, so that way we can work together in preserving what we all want, which is the sanctity of our town and the story that it represents and where we all came from.
Exactly. Yeah. And we're getting there. And I mean, I have a book I'll have to share with you. My daughter Terry is an urban planner, but she primarily works for nonprofit groups or cities that want to save open space and all of that. But this is a book that's been written about the myths of what you hear from politicians is you have to continue to develop or you will stagnate. I mean, that's the way they phrase it.
That's the mentality.
But as Frank Robinson always said, well, if that's true, then um, Newport, then New York should be really
Booming.
in great shape. You know, at one time, New York was almost going to go bankrupt because, I mean, there's one thing about if growth, what happens is, and ever since it's more or less since the war, but when they started to buy big tracts of land, so the developer comes in, buys a big tract of land, and that eliminates the individuals buying pieces of property. And it allows them to almost dictate how much that's gonna, how much the property's going to cost everybody. So they have all the money. And just like with the view that I was talking about before, the highest and best use, the guy that pays the most for the property is going to get it. And then he's going to want to do whatever he wants to do on it. And you have a lot of people who will profess that, first of all, we have to continue to have this kind of development, which is not true.
Agreed.
And second of all, they say, but property rights should allow you to do whatever you want on your property, which isn't really true either, because yes, we either have to buy that property from them or something. and on Mariners Mile, for instance, once we decide, the community, if it can work together and say what's okay, what's not okay, how can we do justice to the idea that we want to preserve marine uses, when in fact those guys would rather build condos because that brings them more money.
It's self-generating. It's recurring revenue for them.
Yeah, and there are ways to do these things, and I don't think the council people are, they're not, their professions haven't been such that they even understand how you can do things. So they're a victim almost of their own ignorance.
Circumstance, yeah.
So my message is, if you care, you need to find a way to express yourself and then find like-minded people if that's the case. Like, here's a perfect example. If that developer thinks that he should put Duffy's service part of his organization underground, I think he's nuts. And I'm sure that other people will too. And so then you say, okay, well, how do we keep that from, how do we make sure that Duffy provides a really good service to the community with his Duffy boat sales and his Duffy boat rentals. And
It's iconic. It's developed in it's a organic product developed right here in Newport.
I know, it's perfect. It's so perfect. And it should have all the space it needs for
Its operation and
its
growth.
operations. Not building its boats, they build them somewhere else. But anyway, that's an easy one, at least for me, because I don't think anybody would disagree particularly. But where they would get stuck would be, okay, but how do you make that happen? Well, we just do, that's all. It boggles your mind, and you have to kind of zero in on certain things, because there's always the issue of, I mean, there's some people that say, well, you just have to build more houses so they'll be able to be affordable. Well, they're not.
Yeah.
You know, and so there's so many different aspects of it. I can understand why people generally, most people kind of want to know who to vote for, but they don't have the time to invest in all of the work that goes into figuring out what we want. So, but I mean, the cost of living here for younger people. I just was looking at, I wrote a letter to the editor of this. I just sent it in, and it's about, it may not, I don't know whether it'll resonate or not, but our city mayor, our city Muldoon, wrote a letter supporting the idea that Amazon would move its second headquarters into Irvine.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that would be like moving 2 or 3 whole Laguna beaches in there. And somebody from Seattle had commented that after Amazon moved in there, the price of housing doubled. And just what you were saying earlier about something.
To the effect that knowing that the rising housing prices, being born and raised here, the prospects of calling this my home in the future with such a high rising cost, does that entice me to become involved, even at my age, even though I'm still living here, to be involved in the future of Newport when I don't perceive myself being able to live here? And that's what I was.
Well, and so you have to grapple with that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have a daughter who just got a divorce, and she's living in Promontory Point, and they sold their house up on Leeward Lane. I think it was a mistake, but anyway, I mean, she's invested in the place. She loves the place. I mean, and has looked all over as to what she can't afford most of the housing here now. But Promontory Point is very nice for the moment. So we have to really search for the right answer. When we were fighting 4 years ago, we had Measure Y, which was going to expand Newport Center. And Rush Hill, who was the mayor, was saying, he said, but my family would love to live in a condo in Newport Center, my kids. And I didn't ask his kids whether they would or not. Because, I mean, I try really hard to think about what this person is saying to me. What does it mean, and is it right or not? Because there are a lot of people that I know who love living in condo or apartments in New York City or Chicago, because it's a lifestyle that somehow they don't have a car, they can walk to places, they can take the transit. The truth is, no matter what you do with Newport Center, it's not going to be like that. And
it doesn't have the capacity to handle that kind of an infrastructure of large buildings and influx of people.
Transit.
It's just impossible.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
So you can't really
turn it into that.
It isn't really true. On the other hand, they are putting an assisted living place in where Museum House was, which seems like a good use of that. But anyway, it's a lot of soul searching.
Yeah. And then that's exactly what it is.
In trying to understand different points of view. But we're getting a lot of that with people like the Mariners Mile Coalition. People are really soul searching about what do we really want. It's always true. I mean, don't just complain. You got to know what it is you want, or what you think that is right. And because of my daughter, we've found there's a lot of ways to achieve these things that you can do.
Yeah.
And if it's really important to you,
You'll find a way.
Can do a campaign and raise money to save it, which is what is happening with Banning Ranch. Is those guys have really, you would like Terry Welch, I think he's a young guy.
Oh, I'd love to talk to him.
Huh?
I'd love to talk to him.
Yeah.
Please. I mean, that's what's fun about me. I like everything that I'm involved in, I've always ironically found the same people involved from the other organizations all kind of
Right.
accumulate in the same things.
Yeah.
And I think that helps you kind of find the same like-minded people.
Mhm.
And the more like-minded people you find, you start generating I wouldn't say a culture or a perspective, not an ideology, but you know what I mean, kind of a thought process.
Mhm.
And just like within leadership, you have 3 or 4 followers or 3 or 4 believers, it's going to start gravitating people towards that thought
Mhm.
process.
Mhm.
And the more exciting and the more enticing it becomes, like, hey, even if you're living up in, not Park Newport, gosh, what's that one apartment complex across from Newport Harbor High School?
Oh, Coronado.
Yeah, the Coronados. I think they're called something different, but I'm always going to remember
Yeah,
them as the Coronados. But like, even if you're renting right there, you're still going to care if there's going to be a 20-story-foot building now on Mariners Mile, literally overtowering you, where you can't even see the sunset. Yeah, that's going to affect
Yeah,
you in some
that's
shape or
right.
form.
Yeah.
So yeah, in
Yeah.
effect, then it does matter to you now. Now
Yeah.
it does become a relevant issue because it is going to affect you. And I think that's what really needs to get out, is to show how these things will affect people in the
Yeah.
future. And that's how you can create value.
Well, we've been able to, I'm convinced, because of things we've done over the years, but in the last few years, where we had the vote on no on why, which was almost 70% people voted that in the museum house. We had that tremendous
Thank God for you guys for
uprising
that.
against that
Yeah.
thing.
I remember my mom coming home almost every day talking about that, and I was just so proud of everyone here just saying, "Get
Yeah.
out of our town," kind of a thing. Gosh, that
That
made me
was-
happy.
The highlight of all of our days. And I mean, I didn't have any idea that it would just go like that.
Yeah.
It just,
Explode
yeah.
in terms of backlash and everything, and community
Yeah, right.
involvement. Gosh, that was fascinating.
But
Yeah.
somebody has to raise the flag, as I say.
Yeah.
And that was just because we did. I mean, and that's where line in the sand came in, is to be able to do that referendum. And it takes huge amount of work to do this, especially on a consistent
Basis.
scale.
Mhm.
But we have a pretty much now developed a pretty good structure. And for me, it's really important, though, to have it be a broad sort of consensus that develops about what we're thinking.
Good.
Thank you for letting me be interviewed today.
Thank you.
I'm Jean Watt,